What does the Bible say about activism? Let's talk about that. Welcome to YA Talks, the podcast where we talk about everything young adults need to know about the adulting life and walking in Christ. I am Pastor JP Kabuhat, the youth and young adult pastor of Greenhills Christian Fellowship, and today it's back! YA Talks is back with an all new format as a podcast streamed live, but also available on demand. And soon you'll be able to access YA Talks wherever you get your favorite podcasts. To start things off, this is YA Talks Tough Topics. In each episode, we'll be inviting a special guest to talk about topics that aren't often discussed in church. Things that you may have asked or thought about but never really talked through with someone else. And in today's episode, tough topic number one is Christianity and activism. Join me as we welcome today's guest, Pastor BJ Sebastian. Hey,
Hi
Pastor.
everyone. Good evening.
Thank you so much for taking this time to talk with us about this topic.
Hi. It's always a pleasure to address the youth and the young adults.
Our listeners should find it interesting that you actually have first-hand experience about what we will be talking about. So, can you share with us first your concept of that activism? Do you have any memorable story or experiences with activism as well?
Okay, maybe let's start with maybe an old definition of activism that I once embraced. And for me, and maybe for most people, most young people who consider themselves activists, it is activism is simply confronting the civil authority or the powers that be uh, about the error of their ways and trying to push a social agenda or an improvement in society by doing certain activities such as rallying in the streets or even to the point of acting as revolutionaries. I certainly defined it that way before. And as a result, when I was in UP, I got involved in the student council and other organizations that exposed me to the streets and exposed to all of the danger of doing that, confronting a dictator during the time, and trying to get the rest of society to come along with us to oppose him, and of course, suffered all of the consequences of my actions. But now I think activism must be viewed in a broader sense, and I believe that activism is simply confronting the evil in society with what we believe is good. And in that broader sense, I still am an activist up to now, although I am an activist that seeks to change society, not systemically, but to seek to change society for the better spiritually. So that is now the form of activism that I exercise as a believer in Jesus Christ.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Pastor. I'm sure a lot of different views can be said or discussed about what activism is and how it should be carried out. But based on your study of the Bible, what does it say about activism? Does it say anything about how Christians should view activism or whether or not they should take part in it?
Okay, the Bible does have a lot to say, but before it addresses about things about what we can do to be activists today, it first tells us what we should do as Christians, as believers in society. And I believe that the Bible speaks fluently about that in First Peter chapter 2, verses 13 to 17. When Peter wrote this, he wrote it to a society that was hurting. It was under the evil rule of the Emperor Nero, and they were really oppressed, and they were suffering evil from their government. And Peter was writing to them; they were under extreme injustice. But he said that believers are to come under the civilian authorities because the civilian authorities are actually ordained by God to carry out his purposes in society. Paul said that also in Romans 13, verses 1 and 2, where he said, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment." So that's the rule. These the government then was not just oppressive; they were murderous. They unjustly arrested Jesus, as you know, and Peter tried to defend him with the sword, but Jesus said for Peter to put away his sword. He said, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword," meaning will be punished by the authorities. When he was tried unjustly in the night, as you know, that's an illegal trial. In First Peter 2:23, he did not protest the injustice. Peter said that when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him, that's God, who judges justly. And that's how we should act. God's purpose for government is to restrain evil and to promote good. Now, the reason why we are to submit is in verse 15 of First Peter 2, which says, "For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people." And that phrase, "by doing good," actually harkens back to verse 12, where Peter says, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." So it is God's will that by submitting, we do good. So Christians should not be known as rebellious or revolutionaries who foment violence against the governing authorities. Rather, we should be seen as peaceful, law-abiding citizens, even if we are really citizens of heaven and strangers here, and even if we are activists for the Lord in this realm. It is by God's design that by doing good, we are able to disprove the accusations of people and heap coals on their head, as Romans 12:21 says. Um, Nothing strikes against and silences evil better than an upright and a peaceful life. But, there's a but. And there are exceptions. Because verse 16 says, "Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover up for evil, but living as servants of God." Now, as servants of God, there are certain things we cannot obey government for. For example, no? Not doing evil that the government or orders, like the Hebrew midwives in Exodus 1. They did not kill the baby boys. Not worshiping under gods, under the government orders, like Nebuchadnezzar ordered the worship of his idol, of his statue. And the friends of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, would rather go to the fiery furnace than obey the king. Like Daniel himself, not to pray to other gods, but to pray to the God of Israel in Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. And he was thrown into the lion's den. He subjected himself to the governing authority whose right it was to throw him into the lion's den. Of course, God spared him, and it was a great testimony that actually converted the king. Like the apostles in Acts chapter 4, they kept preaching Christ. They kept healing people and spreading the gospel when they were ordered not to. And they were whipped and beaten, but they said in Acts 5:29, "We would rather obey God than men." So those are some of the objections.
Now, we know for a fact that there is no perfect government, nor is there such a thing as a perfect government official. Corruption, deceit starts in the heart. How then should we respond to evil in the government?
Well, we can get practical here, but I think the principle is it's still, as First Peter 2:12 says, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable." That must be the behavior that we should exhibit. Because in verse 9, he said, "You're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a people for his own possession." For what purpose? That you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Obviously, you cannot fight darkness with darkness. So you must fight evil or be an activist against evil by doing good. And I have some practical suggestions for you if you will listen to it. And but maybe the principle first. The principle is, if we define activism as confronting evil in whatever form, whether in civilian authority or in society in general, because we believe that there's some good that we represent, then we must be sure that we represent that good accurately. And that means we should know our Bibles. We should know what it says about issues. We should know what it says about abortion or other laws that try to destroy the family, and represent it well and speak well of it. So that's the principle. Live honorable lives, represent the good of God honorably and peaceably.
All right. So, with regard to that principle, how would you advise young adult Christians about applying that in activism?
Well, I know that all of you are kind of raring to go. I've experienced being an activist before, and I know the fire that burns inside your bones. So, and you have to put it to good use, though. You have to keep it under control. One, I think, is if you would like to address evil in the public square, you must do so peaceably, honorably, without insulting people, without calling out people and calling them names, without shouting them down, without fomenting violence. No, that of course is a given because we cannot do that as Christians. But you can legally write your legislators, write the cabinet members. They have websites. You can email them. You can send them letters. You can meet with them, and you can represent the good that you see in the scriptures, which you think they should apply in their policies. And you must do it as an informed person, intelligently, and with a lot of backup from the word. But the most powerful thing that you can actually do, and it's very practical, is to pray. Just pray. Some people say just pray, but prayer is our most potent tool, because if our God is the one who ordained them and they are accountable to God, then we pray to God to make them accountable to Him and to straighten them out. That's what we should pray for. We should pray for their blessing. We should pray for their salvation. We should pray for wisdom to come upon them. We should pray for them to see the error of their ways, even as we point it out to them legally and in honor and in excellence and in peaceable ways. So pray, proclaim the truth. No, that's what I mean by truth telling. Proclaim the truth from the scriptures and pray. Those are the two very, very potent things that you can do as Christian activists.
Okay. Pastor, we received a comment from the comment section. Elder Tani asked, how should Christians participate in this situation in Myanmar now?
Number one, most important thing, as I said earlier, is to pray. Pray for the Rohingya refugees. Pray for what's happening there. Pray for the democratic forces that are now being suppressed. Pray for the Lord's will to happen in that country. Sometimes the Lord allows even evil government to be an instrument of His judgment. And maybe what we should pray for is for Christian witness to grow in Myanmar. One of the most revolutionary things that we can do is to go there as missionaries, as businessman missionaries, as worker missionaries, as teacher missionaries, and share the gospel with them, changing society spiritually, one heart at a time. That's the best thing we can do for Myanmar, because the problem there is not just systemic, it is spiritual.
Thank you for that comment. And I resonate so much with transforming the nation one person at a time. There was a time when back in 2018, if I could remember, one of the things or one of the angst that I was going through was I felt helpless with what's going on with our country because I was pastoring, I was leading also a family, I'm discipling a kid, I'm starting a family myself. When you go on to the news and there's so many things going on, I felt, Lord, why can't I do anything? And it dawned on me the thing that you said also, that discipleship is as nation building as it can be.
Yes.
And the problem there is because for us young people, it's like this is so long term. I want immediate result. And the problem with discipleship is it starts with a seed and it grows a little bit and it takes time up until you see the fruit when they're already leading somewhere of influence. So I really resonate, Pastor, with what you said.
Yeah.
And yes, and also if I would recap a few things that I would take home, two things that you said as an application. It's the most important thing is to pray about it, to
Yes.
truly take it up to heart, because said a friend from the youth said to me, if you speak a lot, you talk a lot, you address the wrongs a lot, but you don't pray as much, I'm not impressed. But then also I realized that when we are heralds of truth, like what you also said, then we must be aware of what the Bible or the truth is, especially on things we are calling out people about.
Mm.
All
Well,
right.
well,
Another
let's
question.
remember.
Oh,
Yeah,
go
let's
ahead. Go
remember.
ahead, Pastor.
The Lord said, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves. Never take it upon yourself. Start a revolution." God can certainly start one. He said, "Leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, Vengeance is mine; I will repay," says the Lord. So, I think that should be our guide. That, by the way, is the context of all that Paul said about being submissive to government, and it's the same thing that Peter said in First Peter. We live with excellence, we live in peace, and we submit ourselves to government, but we do not stop being activists for Christ.
Okay. Another question I received is voicing out a negative opinion on government equal to not submitting to authority?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is voicing out a negative opinion on government or critic equal to not submitting to authority?
Well, if you're voicing it out and you're not addressing the person who is offending, then you're not doing it correctly, right? So I think if you're voicing it out to rally people to be against that person, and you do so in a way that is derogatory, demeaning, insulting, then you're obviously not doing it the right way. And you are, in fact, sinning against God by doing that. The right way to do it, I believe, is, I don't think that as Christians that automatically muzzles us from speaking the truth. In fact, we should not. We should speak the truth, but we should always speak the truth in love, legally, peaceably, honorably, not putting people down, tackling issues, not people, respecting the position, even if we are against the person, addressing the evil with biblical truth. Uh, that is how we should speak. That is how we should address evils in our society. So there are many evils in our present society, maybe in our present government, in our present world, and we must address them as believers. We cannot keep quiet because sometimes silence is acquiescence, and acquiescence is tacit approval of what's happening around us. If there's evil, we cannot tacitly approve evil.
And another comment from Pastor Dags said, he said that I would comment that it should be encouraged for Christians to be involved in grassroots and barangay slash community level initiatives, being peacekeepers and being salt and light by assisting in community building, especially for the marginalized and the poor that are most affected by evil powers in society, both in the private and public sector.
I
Another
definitely agree. Definitely agree. Yeah.
One more comment is about the 2020 election. It says that, thank you so much for this, pastors. At the moment, we need to pray for 2020 election, that our people vote based on value and we too prayerfully vote. And a follow-up question was sent to me because of that. How should we as Christians prepare for 2022 elections?
First of all, to pray for all of those who are planning to run, that the Lord might guide them. You see, the Lord is the one who sets up our leaders and who takes them down. So He's the one who gets people elected. No? Sometimes we kind of question how come this guy was elected when he's obviously, not a Christian, not even a decent man, not even like this and like that. And perhaps it's because, it's just a part of the sinful nature of the world, the fallen nature of the world, that our judgments are fallen, are short-sighted, are misguided. No, so perhaps what we should be involved in, and I believe in the evangelical sector before, there's a strong push for voter education, and that I believe is a worthy cause to be involved with if you're a Christian. Get the issues out, not promoting any particular candidate, but setting up the public debate on the issues. What are the issues that we should vote on? If we are going to vote on issues, what are these issues? And how are we as Christians going to weigh on those issues? What does the Bible say about those issues? And if the Bible is silent about specific issues, what is the right thing to do? What is a reasonable track to follow? So we should engage ourselves in those kinds of debates in the different forums that is available to us. And I think I would hearken to community development, community building.
Mm-hmm.
Grassroots work is, I think, the Christian's territory. No, that's our territory. That's where we go. We go to homes, we go to individuals, we try to meet their temporal needs, and that's why we have a mercy ministry in church, so that
Mm-hmm.
we can address. And that's what I was trying to do in UP before. I was in this social service organization trying to meet the needs of this poor community in Marikina, while at the same time rallying for the policy reforms that we thought would help them get out of poverty. And we can
Mm-hmm.
still, we preach the gospel, we proclaim the truth against the evils of society, but at the same time, we should reach out to those who are poor and help them ourselves. Our church is blessed with so much resources, so many
Mm-hmm.
people, so many influencers. We should be at the forefront of mercy ministry in our society.
Yes. Grassroots is our territory. I'm going to take that
Grassroots.
home too.
Yes.
We have another question. It says, Heya says, hi, pastors. How do we address Christians who are almost like blind followers of certain government officials? Because as they say it, it is what the Bible says to obey the government.
Um, I think they get the wrong idea of what that means. Yes, we obey the government. Yes, we respect those who are elected. And not only respect them, we are to pray for them. We are to support them. We are not to rebel against them. No? But that doesn't mean that we cannot constructively comment on what some of their actions and bring the truth to bear on what they're doing. If they're doing something that's definitely, for example, if they promote, let's say, abortion, if they promote some kind of lifestyle that the Bible does not recommend for society, for us, no, then we must speak our side. We must involve ourselves in the debate. No, if there's a divorce law that's being passed, if there's something that will legitimize abortion, we should be at the forefront of the fight against that, and we are to speak. And that is not rebellion. That is not partisan politics. That is simply bringing the good of God to bear upon the evil of this world. Now, will we be able to change the world? No. Will we be able to reverse the evil trend that we see? It's getting worse and worse. No. The Lord said it's going to get worse and worse. The Lord said that, the prince of the power of the air is still ruling. And because he is, then this world is going by his way, right? So we don't expect to change the world in that sense. We must, however, come against the evil as they present themselves to us. It is not a sin to comment about a certain elected government official's policies or his directions. It is not a sin to point out that he might be in error, as long as you do it honorably,
Mm-hmm.
peaceably, excellently, and in love. Seek
Mm-hmm.
not to put him down, but seeking to improve him and the way that he conducts governance. If that
Mm-hmm.
is the motivation, then we're fine. Remember, the Lord sees the heart, He looks at the heart. He checks your motivation. If your motivation is to simply lash out at this guy or rant in public, then you're out. You're not doing it right, right? The motivation must be restorative, corrective, improvement, and as a support to him, not as something that will tear him down. So I think that's the answer to that question.
Wow. I wish we have so much more time to discuss about many other things that our family are commenting or is commenting in the comment section and many more. But for now, that'll be it. Thank you so much, Pastor BJ, for allocating this time for this sensitive topic.
No problem. It was my joy. It's always my joy to address the church, especially the young people, the young adults. You're the shakers of this society. You should be activists for Christ.
Yes, and thank you all so much for joining us in our first episode of YA Talks. What about you? What are your thoughts about Christianity and activism? Let's talk about it more in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends and colleagues. Next week is an exciting episode. We're sure you have questions about God and life and how to stay sane in this crazy world. Email your questions to You Got Questions at gcf.org.ph. My name is Pastor JP and this is YA Talk. See ya next week.